Good afternoon. Welcome to PMO Learning's webinar today on sponsors in the PMO, or PMO and the sponsors. We're going to be taking you through a session that's going to take about 45 minutes. Hopefully you've managed to grab yourself a drink, have lunch, whatever it is you like to do when you're dialing into these things during the day. I hope you're having a good day so far. And before we get going, just a little bit of preamble. You obviously here, this is you see on the screen, this is a session that you're going to be listening to this afternoon. We do use chat, and you should be able to see that on your toolbar, that you've got the chat option. We can chat throughout, and you'll see it either goes to hosts and panelists or it's to everyone. So you know, we like to get a bit of chat going on. You can also ask questions in there in the chat, but you can also use the Q&A if you want to do it through there as well. And yeah, it's you know, an interesting session to be had. So what we're going to do, I'm going to hand you over to Eileen Roden. Hello, Eileen. Are you ready?
Afternoon. Nearly. Always ready. What's that phrase? Born ready.
Born ready. Right. Well, I'll let you introduce yourself and take it away. Thanks,
Lindsay. So this session this afternoon is going to be about sponsors and the PMO. In terms of kind of who I am, I'm one of the directors of PMO Learning, also one of the co-founders and directors of House of PMO. I always kind of feel as though I need to kind of say, well, I know I do that now, but I have actually spent lots of time actually working in a PMO and managing PMOs. For the last 16 years, I've been around training and consultancy, and I have to say, for a large number of those years, I have spent quite a bit of time working with organizations, looking at the role of the sponsor. And so, you know, a lot of what I'm kind of going to talk about today, and a lot of what we kind of cover on the course, is based on lots of experience of work with lots of different organizations, both private and public sector, in terms of looking at the role of the sponsor and how we as a PMO can support them. So in terms of the whole kind of concept of PMO customers, we do this on lots of courses. We talk about who are the customers of the PMO, who do we provide services to, who comes and asks us for things. And typically we kind of, it usually gets kind of lumped into kind of three different areas. So the first one we always like to have to service, as it were, is the executives at a portfolio level, looking at kind of obviously doing that kind of higher level reporting, looking at portfolio management, which projects are being undertaken, the whole project approval process, how we facilitate that. So and not necessarily every PMO looks at and services the executives, but a fair few have got an organizational portfolio office or a kind of an enterprise portfolio office kind of do that servicing to the executives. Very typically, an awful lot of what we do with our customers is around the delivery teams, and we talk about the work we do for program managers. And typically, if we're working in a program office, a lot of the work we do is actually doing program management with the program manager, because typically the program manager doesn't have a huge amount of time to do, well, they're full time, but there's so much to do in terms of program management that we will often pick up things like program planning, program risk management, as well as all of the standard Centre of Excellence activities. At the project manager, again, we're doing similar types of support, certainly in doing lots of kind of monitoring across the project. And you know, we've often talked about still part of the PMO role is doing that kind of project administration work. There are even times where we would see ourselves actually supporting the delivery team. So particularly with large projects and programs where we're actually kind of working with stream leaders who are looking after kind of streams within the projects and programs. We will do work and facilitate workshops for them. We will help them sometimes kind of complete reports. We will work with them to kind of work out the best way to look after their risks or issues. We may help them in terms of organizing and planning and some scheduling work. So delivery teams is very much kind of, I would say, you know, kind of the vast majority majority of PMO people are working with their delivery teams. And we also, and again, it's often kind of an area that some PMOs miss, but we do have customers in the business or the organization, whatever we call it, functional managers. So these are people who we work with when we're identifying how the PMO needs to work with the different kind of functional areas across the organization. So that goes from almost always the finance department. How do we work with the finance department? How does project approval need to be to get the funding? How do we do stage release of funding? How do we do the financial reports at the at the end of every month to kind of fit in with the project and program reporting? It may be HR in terms of, you know, how do we do the resource allocation to the projects? How do we recruit directly onto projects or into business as usual for secondment on the projects? All of those kind of business as usual activities. Sorry, all of the kind of functional managers. And then from a business as usual activities, and again, when we cover this off in the P3O course, it's not very often PMOs think about this, is about actually doing the transition management. So we know, kind of giving some kind of visibility of the next kind of 3 months, all of the particular projects and programs that are going to go live as a consolidated view, and how that's going to be kind of changing and hitting certain points of the organization. So that's kind of typically the picture we get when we start listing off who the customers are. And it's only very rarely do anybody actually identify that sponsors are seen as an integral part of the delivery team and are potentially a group of people who play a substantive role in project delivery. Now, it doesn't matter whether you're doing waterfall delivery or whether, you know, kind of the good old kind of incremental delivery, or whether you're doing agile. So for those of you who might not recognize that picture on the right hand side, that's agile project management organization structure. The project sponsor has a crucial part to play in project delivery. And in a lot of organizations, we even when I look at the project delivery framework and a lot of the focus in terms of the processes and procedures and the governance structures that are set up, it's very clear to see what the project manager role is. What we often is not very clear is what the role of the project sponsor is and how they, so a classic example of that is the kind of the person who leads and should drive stakeholder engagement across the project belongs to the project sponsor. Yes, we all kind of go on our project management courses and we learn to do stakeholder engagement and the power and influence graph and doing our communications plan. And it's often presented on project management courses without actually kind of referring back to say, well, actually, typically when the project manager is on board, the project sponsor should already have done quite a bit of work in establishing who the key stakeholders are to actually get the project to a point where we need a project manager in the first place. So there's a lot of the kind of the things that we expect the sponsor to do. We learn almost through the kind of the project manager role rather than understanding and kind of seeing that project sponsor role. And a lot of organizations, and certainly, as I said, quite a bit of my work over the last few years has been working with organizations who have kind of got project management established in their organization. They've got the project manager role and the project team and the project framework established. When they're starting to struggle about kind of doing benefits realization, then the realization dawns is that if we really want to be really successful at benefits realization, we need to have the role of the project sponsor established. And so this is where kind of from a PMO perspective, if we want to improve project and program or support our organizations and improving project and program delivery in our organizations, we have to look at the role of the sponsor. We have to look at how we can kind of support and improve their understanding of their role and what that plays in a project delivery. So I thought I would, rather than just kind of take you through that, because we kind of go through that on the course, I just wanted to give you a kind of a broader view of what the rest of the world thinks about sponsors. So if you're sitting there in an organization saying, that's probably us, perhaps we're the only one who hasn't sorted our sponsors out, or perhaps our sponsors are different to other organizations. Just let me just kind of share with you some of the some of the things that organisations have found when they've gone and looked for sponsors in their organisations. So there was a piece of work that was done, driven by the Office of Government and Commerce and the National Audit Office, and a few of you will have kind of seen some of these kind of findings before. And they've looked at why projects fail. So not just one or two projects, a whole raft of projects and they continually do this kind of year on year, kind of why projects fails. And there are some kind of standard things that continuously come up in terms of why their projects fail. The first one is this kind of lack of a link between what the organization is there to achieve from a strategic perspective, but also in terms of kind of how that drives individual kind of projects and programs. Because if you've got that kind of clear link to strategy to the projects, people are a lot more interested in the projects because they're recognizing that they are contributing to project success. And that is a key role of the project sponsor, who understand, typically more senior in the organization, understanding what the organization is trying to achieve, what the strategy is, and shapes the overall kind of mandate for the project based on that organizational strategy. So if we don't have our sponsors in place, we're decreasing the chances of our project being successful. So second element of this, of why kind of projects often fail, is because we don't have that key leadership from to the top of the organization. Now, what I certainly don't want to do is suggest that every single project in the organization needs to be sponsored by somebody from the board, because that's absolutely not the case. And you can't have all of the board members supporting every single project because they just don't have the time to do that. But you do need a sponsor who is significantly senior enough in the organization who can ensure that the project can be delivered sufficiently and it has the environment, which means having the right resources. So, you know, we often hear that kind of projects are struggling because they can't get the resources, they can't get the decisions made, and they're waiting for somebody up the food chain to kind of make those things happen. And the sponsor should be there on the project, kind of fighting on behalf of the project and making sure the project manager has everything they need in order to deliver that project. And interestingly, even if we have a sponsor in name, what we need to do is make sure that the project sponsors are seen to have a proactive role, not always reactive, but a proactive role in creating space for the project in the organization and being able to kind of make sure those decisions are made. I've already mentioned this in terms of engagement with stakeholders, and I was doing some coaching at the moment with a PMO manager, and she's had some really interesting kind of conversations where, as the PMO manager for the program, she's been kind of going out and doing kind of presentations on behalf of the program to kind of explain what it's all about. And some of the conversations and the struggle that she's had is about trying to kind of get the kind of the key stakeholders kind of bought into that. And some of the conversations we've had is about actually getting the sponsor of that program to go and do some of those presentations, to recognize that actually it's the sponsor who should be seen as the person's vision that needs to be relayed. And so there's been some kind of conversations about kind of getting the sponsor to kind of stand up and pick that role, and it's made a huge difference to the general kind of acceptance of that project and program. And particularly where some of the projects and programs have some very difficult messages, you need that sponsor to be able to kind of drive that through. They've also identified in terms of one of the reasons for project failure is the kind of lack of skills and proven approach to management, general project management and risk management. And interestingly, this also reflects on the project sponsor, because interestingly, from a textbook perspective, though we don't often see it in practice, the person who has accountability for ensuring the right processes are in place, funnily enough, are not the PMO. It's actually the project sponsor. The project sponsor has overall accountability for the success of the project, and it's the project sponsor who should be working with the project manager and the PMO to say, well, what is the right approach for delivering this project? What level of a risk is appropriate for this type of project, and that we're happy to kind of go through. So there are some key accountabilities that sit at sponsorship level that need some kind of basic understanding of project and program management in order to be able to kind of make those decisions. So that was what the National Audit Office found, and kind of we're back on the really negative. So I thought it'd be really useful to go and do a bit more of a positive approach and say, well, actually, let's not kind of look at all of the negative things about why projects go wrong. Let's go and have a look at what makes projects go right. So what we did is we looked at a research that was done and led by the APM. So again, a professional body for project and program managers. So they looked at, says, what actually needs to be in place for projects to be successful? And they identified kind of 12 key elements. And again, it was quite a large study done by both practitioners and academics to come up with this work. And what surprised me was quite how many of these are actually driven by the project sponsor. So I just want to kind of take you through a few of them. So first one is effective governance. Yes, and as I've already shown in the organization structure about whether that be a kind of a waterfall or an agile project, the project sponsor has a key role to play in terms of the governance structure, but also ensuring that the governance structure is right for that particular project or program. And I was doing some work yesterday, funnily enough, we're doing some work on peer reviews, and we were talking with the people who were doing peer reviews exactly, kind of what needed to be in place. And this was the first thing that they kind of came up with, is actually you just need to know what the project and program's about. What is it we're actually trying to achieve? And sometimes that has to go beyond what are the deliverables that we're producing, which absolutely the project delivery team are kind of absolutely focused on. But it's that view from the project sponsor in terms of, well, why are we producing these deliverables? What impact are these deliverables going to have in the organization? How does that align with our strategy? So obviously, in terms of getting some clear goals and objectives, has to be driven by the project sponsor. This whole kind of commitment to project success, and one of the things I've often talked about is the kind of the sponsor. Is your sponsor a chicken or a pig? You'll have to go and find that. The blog's there on our website. But talking about that actually is typically the project sponsor is a line manager who absolutely needs the project to be successful in order for them to be able to achieve their organizational KPIs and targets. So they have a real vested interest in making that project successful. So again, another one for them. Capable sponsors was kind of a key finding of the research. And it's really interesting in terms of, we talk about having project and program management competency framework. You'll know that we've been working with the House of PMO on their other competency framework that's been produced from the House of PMO. But actually, do we actually know what a capable sponsor looks like? What's the competency assessment we would do for a project or program sponsor? Do we have a kind of a role profile for those? But we need to make sure that we've got the right sponsors and that they're kind of skilled up to be able to do their role. If we want to deliver the project, we need to make sure that we have sufficient funding. And again, a key role of the project sponsor is to ensure that the project and program manager have enough things to be able to deliver the project, which includes the funding. And again, interestingly, it doesn't necessarily just mean kind of getting the check from the finance department. Very often the project sponsor in that wider stakeholder engagement might be looking at external funding and support for the project with third parties and company partners. Supportive organizations. I was doing some of the work I was doing yesterday. One of the interesting kind of conversations we had, and it came up in a number of exercises that we did in the training. And I just kind of questioned, and I'm quite, as an external party, sometimes it's much easier to kind of see, but I actually called them out because there appeared to be a reticence to talk about some of the more kind of negative aspects of projects and programs, which in the kind of the course we were doing was could have caused some issues. But part of kind of delivering a project has to be the right environment, the right culture. And very often that, yes, is driven by the organization, but because a project or program is a small part of the organization in its own right for the delivery of the project, the sponsor can have a key role in driving the right culture on their particular project and program, because kind of they cast a shadow of their particular area of work. They can support the right behaviors. They can address the more negative behaviors on their project and program. So in terms of kind of from a sponsorship role, they can really kind of provide that kind of supportive structure for an organization to deliver in. Just go back in terms of the end users and operators. Now, we've talked a bit about sponsors kind of doing the wider stakeholder engagement. In pure project management, the project manager and the project team are there to deliver the outputs and kind of embed them in the organization. But it's the sponsor who really drives benefits realization. And part of that is actually getting the sign-on and the buy-in from the people who are actually going to be using those end products at the end of the day. So if we want engaged end users and operators, and I know I've worked in several organizations where you're about to deliver something new into the organization, you say, we need everybody to go on training. And then all of a sudden, nobody finds the time to do the training. You go live and people say, no, I don't know how to use this. I didn't have time to do the training. And part of the role of the kind of the project sponsor is making sure that the organization is ready to receive the deliverables from the project. So that level of kind of engagement with the end business as usual, which is often the part of the business that sponsor has a substantive role in, is key to project success. Last couple of areas, this concept of competent project teams. Part of the role of the sponsors we've already mentioned is to ensure that the project has everything it needs in order to be successful. Part of the sponsor role is to ensure that the level of risk associated with the project is a risk that they're happy to take, because they are kind of have overall accountability for the level of risk of that particular project or program. And so part of their role is to make sure that we have got the right level of skills and capabilities to deliver the project effectively and efficiently. And so part of the role of the project sponsor is to ensure that we've got the right project manager and that that project manager has access to the right individuals to deliver the project. Now, I find this interesting in a lot of organizations where the project manager, and I did go to one, and it was very hard to kind of stop my face telling the story when it was we were talking through the project management process, and it was so the project manager then briefs the project sponsor on what the project is about. I said, hold on a minute, just roll that past me again. The project manager is appointed first, and then the project sponsor has to be briefed by the project manager, which causes all kinds of kind of interesting issues. But trying to get that the other way around, and also the whole kind of resource management process about, kind of being given a project manager, whether you like them or not. And certainly one of the things that's really key in terms of making a project go smoothly is that relationship between the project manager and the project sponsor. So being able to establish the project sponsor's role, making sure that they have a level of input and they feel empowered to start kind of talking about who the project manager is and kind of what's available in terms of a project team to drive that in terms of making sure sure that the project can be a success has obviously been recognised by this research as well. So, out of those 12, we've got 8 of them. So over 60% of the things that need to be in place for project success should be driven by and can be driven by an effective sponsor. So the last bit of research I just wanted to pull up was by a company called ProSci. So for people who are involved in change management, and obviously the whole kind of leading change and driving change in the organization to drive the benefits is inherently linked with sponsors. So ProSci did a bit of work, and they looked at looking at sponsors who were involved in the change management to see about how much did they fully understand the role of the sponsor and what their impact was on projects. And they found that only less than 20% of sponsors actually fully understood the role of sponsorship. I think that is quite a breathtaking kind of percentage. Can you imagine if we said only 20% of project managers actually knew how to do project management? When you think of some of the size and the scale of some of the projects that are being delivered by our organizations, then thinking about 20% of all the sponsors actually know how to lead projects is quite disturbing. There's 31% thought they had an adequate understanding of the role of sponsorship. And part of my challenge is adequate compared to what? Adequate in their own mind, or adequate in the role of the sponsor that wasn't potentially properly embedded within their organization, because not only about the sponsors didn't know their role, but actually the rest of the organization hadn't kind of bought into that role. 25% had some understanding of the role, 18% had a slight understanding of that role, and 7% of sponsors had absolutely no understanding of their role at all. And I have to say that my experience kind of mirrors a lot of this. I did some work a number of years ago where I was into helping a PMO introduce project management into the organization. We did all of the normal stuff in terms of doing the project management framework, training up the project managers, and kind of rolling out, of course, all of the kind of the tools and templates that they would need in order to do delivery. And part of my role was also to work with the chief exec and the board of directors to understand the environment that they needed to have in order for projects to be successful. And part of that was also to make sure that the sponsors understood their role. And I was over in Europe, kind of working with kind of one of the boards, and we were just walking them through the project life cycle, not preaching it to them in terms of what their role was just kind of generally understanding kind of what happens at each stage at the project life cycle. And as we kind of got through to handover and delivery, and we talked about the kind of the products are embedded in the organization, so the project is effectively finished and the project manager goes off to do another project, and all of that's fine. And then we said, so we're now into benefits realization. And so kind of who's left around the project to do benefits realization? And this very senior director obviously forgot his mouth was working when his head was working, said, "Who, me?" And he was really kind of quite alarmed because of that kind of dawning recognition that actually the project is finished. We now need to realize the benefits, and it's the sponsor who has to kind of drive that going on. So, and we're talking kind of the really kind of senior people in organizations who are leading the strategic changes in their business. There's still an expectation that the project managers, even after the project's finished, have some accountability for benefits realization, but really no understanding in terms of kind of how that worked or what was involved in that. So this really kind of reflects what my finding has been in terms of working with sponsors across multiple organizations. And the kind of what what ProSci found in some of their kind of conclusions, that the biggest obstacle to kind of project success was this lack of effective change leadership. So all of the things we talked about in the APM study about making sure that the business is ready, the organization is ready to receive the products, that we've got engaged users and operators of those products, that there's actually kind of real buy-in to kind of organizational change to deliver those benefits, is all related to the role of the sponsor. So, and just kind of looking at kind of some of the comments that have come in terms of kind of, that's a really kind of scary report, but I'd be interesting to kind of think about your organizations, about if somebody externally came in and kind of spoke to a number of sponsors, what kind of conversations they would have. And you know, kind of another organization that I was working in, and we were about to kind of look at developing the skills of the sponsors, and my first kind of first activity was to go around and just speak to people who were named sponsors of projects. And what was interesting is that all of these people who'd nominated themselves for me to go and have a conversation with to understand how the organization worked had all identified themselves as good project sponsors. And it was interesting because we went, and some of the conversations, because they were line managers and project sponsors to some of those projects, and they really couldn't differentiate about how they did a line management of somebody who was doing some business as usual activity and their role as a kind of a project sponsor. So they said, well, I meet up with the project manager every week and we discuss what kind of some of those issues are, and I'm always there to help and support them. So of course I'm a good project sponsor, without really understanding that kind of the project is a time driven, we need to get these deliverables, and where actually it isn't just a case of a reactive or a passive role, there's actually kind of a proactive role. There's a whole set of activities that we actually need to undertake as a sponsor. Yes, then actually kind of, it's not just about kind of checking how the project manager is getting on. So it was really interesting that even though kind of some project sponsors who may see themselves as having adequate or complete knowledge of a project sponsor may not actually understand the real role of the project sponsor and how they need to undertake that role. And I have to say, it is one of the more interesting roles to try and deliver into organizations, because atypically sponsors are more senior in the organizations, and from their perspective it becomes kind of the two of the kind of the key things that we have is that we've got the kind of, I've got kind of both kind of fear and kind of credibility. If I'm a senior manager in an organization and I've kind of come up through business as usual, you know, I've been a department head, a divisional head, and I'm really kind of senior in the organization, I'm then given the role of sponsor of a strategic project for the organization. It's quite difficult for me to say, can I just say I don't know how to do this? Yes, as a quite a senior role in the organization, somebody who's seen to have a critical role, them actually kind of holding their hands up to say they don't know how to do that, or they're not sure how to do that, or they want some support, becomes an issue. And they, from their own personal kind of credibility within the organization, is something they can be kind of quite concerned that might be impacted. So there has to be, you know, quite a kind of a sensitive rollout. And often when I do have done sponsorship work, I very rarely do sponsorship training. I do senior level workshops to explore the role of sponsors, because it becomes much more acceptable for them to kind of come along and have a general discussion, but actually what we're doing is kind of educating them in terms of how that role of the sponsor is. So I just thought, again, going along this theme of a service-driven PMO, looking at some of the services that we can provide as a PMO, is firstly to look at what can we do as a PMO, what kind of services can we provide to establish and embed the role of the sponsor in the organization. So it is about having a kind of a clear definition of what the role of the sponsor is, and making sure that's embedded in the governance structure and the delivery processes within the organization. So again, making sure that there is and just to give you a kind of a couple of examples of this. So again, working for an organization driven by improving the skills of sponsorship, we went and kind of had a look at some of the things that were happening in the organization. And so when we get to the end of the planning stage, before we go into execution, there was a formal presentation of the business case to get project funding. And it was the project manager who went and did that presentation. And we said, it can't be the project manager who does that. It has to be the project sponsor who has to do that presentation. And it caused lots of kind of, well, the project sponsor doesn't know enough. And I said, well, surely that's an issue. The project sponsor absolutely should know enough about the business case. And the project manager is always there. And I said, it's a bit like a barrister in a court. The barrister is there kind of doing the prosecution and the defense, but they have all of their legal team behind them with all of the detail kind of providing the information. And that's how the project manager, it's the project sponsor who has overall accountability for the success of the project. And so we changed, and it was a bit uncomfortable for a while, because the project sponsor, of course, is going to that presentation thing and comes, I better read the business case, and if you this is the first time the sponsors have actually read the business cases in any detail, and actually then started to ask questions of the project manager. What does this mean? Does that mean this? And you kind of think, well, at least we're up on that level of engagement. So interesting, looking at kind of some of the wider governance structure, not just the delivery framework, in terms of starting to embed that kind of sponsor role. Obviously, there's some kind of education and training, as I mentioned, about kind of providing some how we kind of do that. And certainly one of the things that we kind of looked at is about how we do succession planning for sponsors, about kind of what level of kind of sponsorship requires, particularly of a certain level in the organization. But also in terms of some of that assurance activities that we would do to highlight where there's kind of some misaligned governance. Once we've embedded that role, there are also some services that we can do to enhance the sponsor role. So creating a sponsor community of practice. So how many of us have got a community of practice for our project delivery teams? Lindsay and I have spent a lot of time kind of working on developing a global community of practice for PMO practitioners. But how many of us have got a community of practice for sponsors? And again, they may not necessarily feel part of the delivery team, and having a community of practice for sponsors where they can share experiences on a peer-to-peer level is absolutely a bit like or rocking horse teeth, or chicken's teeth, is it, or rocking horse something else? Yes, in terms of kind of having that in organizations. And I think this is where actually providing links to other organizations and sponsors of other people in other industries is where we can kind of facilitate some of those events. The whole kind of knowledge management and lessons learned. And again, we talk about it in terms of from a project manager's perspective, but how many of our kind of lessons learned, how many of our reviews actually look at the role of sponsor? And, we then kind of share it with all of the project managers and say, make sure your sponsor does this. But how much of that is actually then fed back to the sponsors and said, in our organization, we have found that these are the things we need our sponsors to do in order for our projects to be more successful. And also encouraging, and again via the kind of the sponsor community of practice, for the sponsors to share that with those peers. And I quite like doing the kind of the sponsor community of practice, because they're kind of quite an entertaining bunch. But it's kind of watching them kind of share, this was a real royal pain. And some of the challenges they have with project managers is something, again, that often doesn't. We often talk about project managers, my sponsor doesn't do this and I really struggle to get it. But it's really interesting listening to the sponsors and some of the challenges they face in relationship to the project managers and trying to keep the kind of the projects on track. And then finally, coaching and mentoring. Now, as a PMO manager or as a PMO person, you may not be the best person to do coaching and mentoring for sponsors. However, what you can do is, once you get an understanding of your community of PMO, of of project and program sponsors is actually say, well, actually, Joe, and we've got a really young kind of sponsor coming up. It's only a small project, but they're learning the role of sponsor. Can you do that kind of sponsorship? So you can put sponsors in touch with each other, so you can actually facilitate the coaching and mentoring, if not doing it yourself. But I would suggest as well, from a PMO manager's perspective, we often, although we often don't talk about it, we sponsor a lot of projects. So a lot of the initiatives that we do in the kind of the PMO, we would be the sponsor, or the kind of certainly kind of seeing the oversight of those projects. So for some of the junior PMOs, we may be able to do the coaching and mentoring, but certainly we can kind of look at facilitating that coach and mentoring at the more kind of senior level. So how can we help it here at PMO Learning? So I'm hopefully you kind of found that useful. And I think we identified it for a kind of a while ago, in terms of actually it's really important for us as a kind of a PMO to understand what's required of sponsors, but start talking through not just what kind of what the sponsor does and kind of getting a clear understanding of that, but what we want to do is help organizations and help PMOs recognize some of the challenges of implementing sponsorship in their organization. So the course that we run, it's a one-day course, and we look at, yes, we talk through in a little bit more detail and clear our understanding of sponsors, and we'll discuss with the delegates who are there about kind of what sponsorship looks like in their organization. But what we really kind of are there to do is to look at, if you wanted to implement sponsorship in your organization, what are the key challenges? What are the kind of things that will really kind of set us on the way? What might be the services? What might they look like in order to make that happen? So hopefully what you come out with at the end of that day is a kind of a plan of attack for your particular organization. So if you want to talk about it a bit more, we've got our next course is running on Thursday, the 28th of October. For those of you who've been in this webinar, if you use that code, so that's a 5 at the front and a 1 in there, you can get a 15% off. And I should know the price of the course, and I don't. Lindsay will quickly type that into chat. She says, oh, better go and find it as well. So she'll put that into chat. And the other thing in terms of where we can help is we have, as I've talked about, we've helped a lot of organizations actually embed project sponsorship in their organization. So this is where we don't do it on your behalf. We work with the PMO and provide kind of consultancy and coaching and mentoring to the PMO to help them kind of put their plans in action. So we can kind of do that as well to help. So that's me talking 20 to the dozen. 42 minutes in, but we do have some time for question. If anybody's got any kind of questions, either you can put that in the Q&A or in chat. We do have a final few minutes for questions.
Yeah, I did get a Q&A, but I don't know whether it was covered off by what you would just showed what is the course outline, because I think one of the things that came up before is that the PMO, and this is, I don't know if this has happened a lot, Eileen, that the PMO is trying to do something to educate sponsors, and whether that's bringing somebody in because actually the PMO might not be the right kind of people to do it or not. But will this one day give them enough, or start on the road to being able to?
The idea is that we can kind of start them on the way to doing that, because we will talk about what we're trying to do, and again, different organizations are in kind of different positions in terms of the culture of the organization, the state of the delivery framework, whether they're just introducing kind of project management as a whole, whether they want to be playing around portfolio management. So depending on where they are, depends on the different challenges. So each of those different areas will be looked at and what the next steps will be. So the idea is that people who come on the course, most people will be able to go away from that course and do what they need to do in terms of the education, training, and the steps involved. And what we've also got, as we've got there, is that if they do need our support to do that, then we can work with them to pull together those presentations. And again, often, and it's really kind of bizarre but very common, is sometimes you need somebody from the outside world to come and tell you. and I've done this several times. I've gone into organizations and the organization's gone, excellent, thank you very much. And I have people in the PMO saying, do you know, we've been trying to tell them that for months. Yeah, but they've just not kind of listened to that. So
yeah, I think one of the other things that's also been apparent for people that have done this course before is this kind of link between the effectiveness of the PMO, why we're there, and getting into the whole metrics and measures type of thing, because it's about being able to prove your worth, as much as we shudder when we hear it. It's actually, if you make the links between successful projects and project failure, and the fact that there's so many things you should be doing around the support of sponsors that should be having a direct impact on the success levels of projects and programs. It's been quite interesting for people to be able to see that perspective, that actually we're not providing any kind of support or anything for sponsors, but even if we just started just doing a few little things, they could potentially have a big change. But we know that it's not going to be easy. It's a bit like we know that benefits management is not easy, resource management is not easy, portfolio management not easy, all the things that we PMO Learning does as individual little courses, because actually this is another one that most people shy away from, because it means trying to work with senior exec type people, and we're not very good at it.
Yeah, no, and it's interesting because all of those areas you mentioned are all places where the portfolio, where the sponsor is going to be involved. Yeah, they touch on all of those areas.
Yeah. I mean, you had a question that you've done a reply to, but Eileen, if you can just do that reply again, but do it to everyone. You sent it to me, my dear. The question there about, obviously with some of this kind of work, it is a very individual thing. As I said, it's this the talk is individual circumstance. I mean, you've seen people chatting today that, oh, my organization's like this, oh, mine's worse than that, because everybody's obviously got individual situations. So maybe there's an individual kind of one-to-one mentoring type stuff, and hopefully Eileen's now just dropped that into the messenger, so you can see roughly how much that kind of one-to-one types coaching, support, mentoring type stuff that we do. But hopefully you've seen, it's a cracking price. It is one of those areas that a PMO can make a huge difference. Like I said, just by doing a little, because actually there's not much going on at all in terms of trying to sort out, how sponsors are supported. But it obviously has a huge impact on how projects can be successful. So there's a code. I'd just like to, any more questions? Eileen, any last words that you'd like to give?
No, as I say, it's an area that I really enjoy, and I've done more and more work, and it gets away from kind of individual project delivery, and actually kind of can be quite transformational in terms of how projects are delivered, but also raising visibility, and has a real impact on the overall kind of portfolio management element in organizations as well.
Super. But please don't hesitate to get in touch. Any of the courses that we do, be lovely to have you on board. And yeah, go get out there, keep on PMOing, give us all a good name, carry on doing a great job. Have a nice day. Take care.